Sometimes the craziest revenge is no revenge. We'll get into that story in a bit, but first, Scorned ex tries to frame me for sexual harassment, so I get her fired. When people said it was a bad idea to initiate intimate relationships with a coworker, I, 32-year-old male, should have listened. If I did, I wouldn't have gone through the mess I went through a few months ago. I wouldn't have gone through the risk of losing my job, my reputation, and everything I held dear. But then again, I can't say all the fault lies with me. I trusted the wrong person was all. I say this to all the men out there, know the kind of woman you find yourself with. Even if you trust her with your life, always be prepared for the off chance that she turns on you so you won't end up like me. It all started when I got a promotion. I became the head of the sales department at my company. The CEO, Jeremiah, liked me very much. We went to the same school and he recognized my skills. By this time, I'd been working in the company for almost 5 years. Shortly after my promotion, we had to move base to a new city and a bigger office. We needed to employ more staff. It just happened that the digital marketing department was in dire need of workers. A few weeks later, talents were hunted and we had new employees. This was when Joanna, 26-year-old female, was employed. The first time I met Joanna was during the quarterly in-house meeting. This was where all the employees of different departments gathered and talked about the progresses they've made over the last 3 months and how they've pushed towards our yearly goal. As usual, the meeting was boring, and all I could think of was going back to my office to finish up my work, so I could continue swiping at profiles on Tinder. But then, it was time for the social media team's presentation, and Joanna stood up with her department coworkers, and I saw her. I remember thinking about how beautiful she looked. She wasn't the most beautiful girl I've seen, but she had a stunning figure, and the look on her face, when she smiled, was something else. I immediately forgot about going back to swipe on Tinder. The meeting went on a lot longer, but I didn't mind. Joanna wasn't the one presenting, but I enjoyed looking at her anyway. By the end of the meeting, I went over to talk to the CEO about some things. When I looked over to her again, I caught her looking back at me. From the way she held my gaze and smiled, I could tell she was into me just as much as I was into her, but I didn't approach her first. I was a leader in the company. I had a reputation to upkeep, and besides, I knew that if I waited long enough, she'd come to me. I was right. By the end of the workday, Joanna came all the way to my department and to my office to specifically invite me out to a coworker's hangout that everyone else was going for. I agreed and we all went out. When it was her turn to get around, she asked me to help her, so we walked over to the bar together. She introduced herself, and when I tried to reciprocate, she laughed and said she knew who I was. We talked for a moment before we turned to the group with the beer. When it was time to leave, she slipped a paper to me which contained her number. When I got home, I wanted to call her at once, but I stopped myself and decided to play it even cooler. So when I returned to work the next day, she came all the way from her department to see me. She told me she was expecting my call or text the previous day, and I just apologized and said I fell asleep. Then I asked her if she'd like to go out to lunch during the weekend. She jumped at this offer. I got to know her better during the weekend, and boy, I wasn't pleased with what I heard. She was beautiful, I'll give her that, but that's the only thing she had going for her. She was dumb and shallow, and I didn't see how I could spend time with her without going crazy. And so I told her. I told her that I didn't see how we could be together because we were different, and us being in the same company further complicated things. She told me it was okay and that we didn't have to date. She said she found me physically attractive, and she didn't really care about all that emotional stuff. This was a big win for me. I didn't have to commit, and we could still get, intimate. That same day, she invited me over to her place and we got into it. From that day forward, we started to exchange texts and pictures that were mostly sexual. It was great, but only for a time. One thing about Joanna was that after a month or so of being as casual as we said we were going to be, she starts to push for more. Every time she did that, I had to set her right and let her know it was purely emotional, and she'd get mad and not talk to me for a day or two. Then she would talk to me and apologize for how she was acting, and we would go again, and I'd pull away and she would apologize. After a few months, the entire ordeal was starting to get tiring, and so I decided to end it. I told her it wasn't working as well as I'd hoped, and she clearly wanted more than I could give, so she was better off looking for it somewhere else. She didn't agree with this, and for months she tried to convince me to take her back. But I didn't. I even had to resort to blocking her at some point. This was where the real trouble started, because after some time, away from Joanna, I met someone else. Someone who I wanted to be with. Her name was Lisa, and she liked me just as much as I did her. We met at my younger brother's wedding and she was the friend of the bridesmaids. After the reception, I asked for her number and we decided to get dinner together and things picked up from there. Within a few months, we were officially in a relationship. By this time, Joanna had stopped texting me and I decided that it was then safe to unblock her. The only person I told about my relationship with Lisa was my best friend Hunter, and he wasn't even working in my company, so I had no mutual idea how my coworkers knew that I was in a relationship. Soon enough, the entire office knew about me and my girlfriend. I didn't really care until Joanna confronted me in the break room. She asked me why I was dating another woman instead of her, and I reminded her that I told her from the start that I wasn't interested in her that way. That started a back and forth that lasted a few minutes, and then she told me she was going to make me pay for what I'd done to her. Excuse me? Pay for what? Everything we did was purely mutual. It wasn't as if I forced myself on her, so there was nothing she could do. At least that was what I thought, until I got summoned by the company's CEO. I went to the office and made a joke about him summoning me to fire me. When he didn't laugh, I knew there was a problem. He told his personal assistant to excuse us and made sure he closed the door before he returned to face me. He told me about the sexual harassment allegations Joanna had made against me and even showed me the statement she wrote. To say I was shocked about what she said about me was an understatement. The deeper I went into her report, the more shocked I was. She told him I had manipulated and coerced her a lot of times by threatening her job. She even reported that I'd said I'd get away with it because I was friends with the CEO. When I was done, I immediately explained that it was all a lie, and I told my own side of the story. After the explanation I gave, Jerry told me that a formal investigation had to be carried out to get the truth of the story before anything could be done. As soon as I left the office, I was tempted to walk into the social media department and grab her by the hair and shake her till she confessed. But I was under investigation, and any further action I took could be used against me, so I decided to keep my cool. I went back to my office like nothing happened. I avoided her like the plague over the next few days while the investigation was being carried out. At one point, I was called in and I had to submit my phone so they could examine our texts and gauge what was happening from how we used to relate. When they were done with that, they looked through the CCTV cameras in the office that had clips of us being together. It took them over a month to complete their investigation. Before HR called us both into the office to talk things out, they made her tell her side of the story. And while they did, they used the evidence on our phone and the video footage to judge the truth of her words. They did it for me too, but eventually, they realized that most of the things Joanna said about me didn't seem through in the way she texted me. For one, they saw that she was the one being more flirtatious in our texts, and the first time we ever spoke, she was the one who approached me. And even when we broke off our relationship, they saw how she reacted and realized that she set the entire thing up to get me fired. The case was dismissed and I received an apology, but that wasn't enough. I told them I couldn't work in the same company with her after the stunt she pulled. She spun lies against me, and because she had already told some of her coworkers in her department, the news had spread, and I was already getting bad looks from people. No matter how I proved my innocence, there were still some people that'll believe that I was guilty and that there was a cover-up going on. Besides, she told a lie that could have gotten me fired. Her behavior didn't represent the company in a good light, and what's to say she won't do it again with a different person? The disciplinary committee discussed my concerns, then they reached out to the head of the social media department to get his thoughts. The head of the social media department, Alex, was also a good friend of mine, and he'd gone through something similar in his college days. So he told them that he wasn't interested in working with someone who could tell grave lies against an innocent person. After he told them his position, they had no choice but to fire Joanna. She begged and pleaded that it wouldn't happen again, but the deed was done, and she had to face the music. She called me a few more times after the office saga, asking me to forgive her and help her get her job back, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. When she started to become annoying, I blocked her number so she couldn't reach me again. Honestly, depending on the company, this could have been more than just OP got fired. If there was a company that took it very seriously, something like that, especially with not exactly clear lines as far as a position of authority goes, might have led to the company trying to blacklist OP from that kind of industry, or even as far as maybe like setting up a potential lawsuit. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, I married my friend's ex-fiance. There is narcissism, and then there is my ex-friend's kind of narcissism. She was so out of touch with reality that many times I wondered if she even knew what she was doing. And it was because I was convinced that she had no idea what she was doing that I put up with her for so long. My friend and I were friends for a total of 5 years. We met at a party my cousin took me to when I was in my freshman year of college. She wasn't in college yet at the time, but was looking to get into my university. I noticed that she danced really well, and since I was a dancer too, I walked up to her and introduced myself. We exchanged numbers and started to text each other, and that was how our friendship blossomed. I didn't really see how selfish my friend could be until she was offered admission by my university and moved in with her aunt, who was, at the time, a professor and lived on campus. First of all, my friend always wanted the best stuff. For some weird reason, she always felt she deserved only the best stuff, and every other person could get the crumbs for all she cared about. For instance, if we go out together and get gifts, we used to work together as dancers, my friend would always want to take the nicest stuff. Even when I got monetary gifts or any other stuff, she tried to convince me to give the best of my gifts to her. She also never wanted to share. If I was given a gift individually, she'd try to get me to share it with her. But if she got a gift, she would never want to share hers. Most times, she wouldn't even tell me about it. On occasions where I'd find out myself, she would start an argument or do something just to ensure that we never share her gifts. I didn't even notice that that was intentional until it became a pattern. My friend was also very competitive. I'm not a competitive person. I'm a chill kind of person, and I mostly just want to hang out with my friends and be around them without feeling like everything has to be a competition. My friend could randomly see me dancing and then start dancing too. This happens mostly when we have company. Even at random house parties, I would start singing and my friend would cut in, ensuring that her voice was louder than mine. Usually I'd just stop singing and let her be the center of attention if that's what she wanted. When she was in her sophomore year, we went to a party together to perform. My cousin's friend had invited us to his party to dance. He said there were going to be people who were big shots in the entertainment industry and that we would make useful connections if we did. We weren't going to get paid, but my friend and I figured it was a good way to get more exposure. We agreed and went to dance together. After performing, a young man walked up to me and complimented my moves. I thanked him and we talked and flirted for a bit. He then told me that he was friends with an artist and I made him promise to put in a word for us. My friend and me, we wanted to be music video vixens so bad at the time, and him helping us get that would have been a big deal. He promised and gave me his number. That night, my friend ignored me all through the ride back home. The host had given us both a ride and she would not speak to me. The next morning, she came to mine and wanted to talk about the man I was talking to the night before. I told her about him and all that we talked about. She then started to talk about how she ignored me all through the ride home because she was jealous. I didn't understand why she would be jealous. She didn't even know him or what we were talking about. She then said she was jealous because she'd had a crush on him for the longest time. That didn't make any sense to me because, like I said, she didn't even know him. But she made something up about having seen him at a party before. She even lied that they flirted with each other. I knew she was lying. She probably had seen him at a party in the past, but they didn't flirt. If they had as much as had a conversation, I just knew the young man would have walked up to her instead of me. Also, he would have at least remembered her. We talked for a bit and he never even mentioned her looking familiar. You know what's even funnier? My friend then said that he probably was going to talk to her, but because we danced together, he got confused and came up to me instead. My friend and I looked nothing alike. We also thought it was ridiculous to wear matching outfits because we danced together, so we absolutely never did that. Anyone could tell us apart. After going back and forth about the guy, I told her that I was going to let him go. It was clear that she liked him, and I just met him anyway. I wasn't going to fight my friend and business partner over some guy that I barely knew. We both agreed to let him go and chose our friendship instead. Now, imagine my shock when the next time we saw him at a party, this guy said hello to me. I responded coldly and kept it moving, but my friend walked up to him and started to flirt with him. She flirted shamelessly with him all evening, even though the guy paid her very little attention. The next day, when I asked her about why she behaved that way, she said it was because I'd responded coldly to the guy and she didn't want him to feel bad. I told her she was outrightly flirting with him, and she said something about doing that because she was a people pleaser and felt responsible for how I treated him. A month later, she came to mine one random evening and suddenly burst out crying. She then told me that she and the guy we met at the party were in a relationship. I was stupefied. I didn't even ask how. I just told her to leave my house. She left, and that was it. We stopped communicating for 4 months. After the 4th month, she reached out to me through my cousin and apologized again. My cousin pleaded with me to forgive her, and I did. We went back to being friends. At the time, she was still with the guy, but she'd never let us be in the same space. Whenever she had him over, she would never invite me. It went on like that until one day, I was at the supermarket when I saw him with some other guy. I decided to be the bigger person and say hello to him, since my friend and I were cool. I walked up to him and said hello. He flashed me a big smile and then asked when I got out of rehab. I thought I didn't hear him well, so I asked what he said and he repeated himself. After a long conversation with this guy, I found out that on the night my friend met him again, the night I responded coldly to him, she told him I was going through some addiction problem and whenever I was trying my hands on withdrawal, I behaved coldly towards others. When she told me they were dating and I cut her out of my life, she told him that I'd gone to a rehabilitation center. The lies were just ridiculous, and it was pretty obvious that she told those lies just to get him to leave me alone. Not only did she lie about me being a drug addict, she made us lose money because the guy had offered to talk to his friend for the dance gig like he promised, but my friend told him I wasn't in a good mental state and couldn't dance. I don't know which hurts me more, the fact that she stole a man from me, or the fact that she made me lose money and what would have been a good connection that would be useful for me in the future. I told him exactly what had happened, and boy was he shocked. He told me that he'd caught her in too many lies and that he was certainly breaking up with her. That was how her relationship with the guy came to an end. Shortly after we left college, my friend started to date this foreigner who was very invested in starting a family early on in life. He was from a wealthy family in his home country and had only come for business. He also went to university here. He proposed to her after 5 months of being with her. She would tell me about him all the time. And even though it didn't seem like she loved him, she was more interested in his family's money and political power. She was excited and looked forward to being his wife. At the time, Facebook was the rave and everybody was getting the app. I got on the app and searched for him on it. Then we started to talk. I did my research about him, so I figured out the stuff he liked and what we might have in common. We both lost one of our parents at a tender age, so I capitalized on that. One day, I told him I had a confession. I lied that my friend was a drug addict and that she was trying to use him for his money. I basically repeated the lies she told her ex about me, but I added more flesh to my story. He confronted her about it, they had a huge fight, and he ended his relationship with her. While all this was going on, my friend had no idea I'd even been communicating with her ex. I was going to tell her about everything I did though. I already planned to tell her the same way she told me about dating that other guy, but her ex started making moves on me. I'd also developed feelings of sorts, so in no time, we started dating. At first, I pretended to be coy and told him we had to keep the relationship away from her until I'd talk to her about it. When I saw that our relationship was solid, I went to her home and broke the news to her. She was hysterical. I ran out of her house that day because she tried to attack me. Still, it was fun to watch her go crazy about doing something to her that she'd done to me too. People are hardly ever willing to take the tiniest dose of their own medicine. My man and I were together for a year before we finally got engaged and married. After our marriage, I left the country to be with him in his home country. My friend still writes and talks about how I betrayed her to this day, but what she never includes is it was she who started it. You know, I was continuously thinking about the fact that they can point out exactly like OP did that they fabricated the story and stole their man, but then I realized it does set it up on a silver platter for OP to turn around and say, you did the exact same thing to me to begin with. I guess I'm just afraid in the end that OP's partner is going to find out one way or another, and how is that going to look, knowing your entire relationship is based on this revenge and lies. This next story is, no revenge is the best revenge. My favorite thing to do when going through stuff on my own personal free time is to ponder and think deeply as to the next step I'm going to take, And also, in that same respect, the most logical way to get out of that situation, I should say that this is my strong suit, as that's the one thing that I know I'm very much capable of doing effectively. But then again, this might also be one of those things that many might not consider a plus, or a healthy habit, but it's just how I am. And I must say, this habit of mine proved to be very effective yet again, as it helped me not so meticulously plan out my act of retribution against my partner, whom I caught red-handed cheating on me with none other than my brother. And the worst part of it all was that not only was my brother not aware of this, but she had also taken advantage of him at his weakest. I'd like to give you a simple walkthrough so as to provide you with a little bit of context in this situation. I, male 28, had been married to my partner, female 26, for near close to 4 years now. And I know for a fact that throughout the entirety of the time that we were together, I made sure that there was nothing that she lacked. And this was majorly because I was quite an intentional man. It was kind of a policy of mine to make sure that there was nothing my woman lacked, whether she brought it to my notice or not. And this was one of the things that really made our relationship flourish, and for things to work out properly for the both of us. But I guess this wasn't the slightest bit enough for her, as she'd always been finding herself wanting more and more, on several situations, on several counts. But then again, I knew this about her, and there was nothing I thought I could do at the time to change her mind effectively. My partner, for this story's sake, let's call her Eliza, Liz for short, was the most kind-hearted soul I'd ever met. On our first ever meeting and conversation with each other was one of those days that would forever remain ingrained in my memories. And this was the day in high school where she came to my rescue, surprisingly. And mind you, this was someone that I had never engaged in conversation before, and someone that was effectively a complete stranger to me at the time. But then again, it was just one of the many things that brought the both of us closer and closer to each other. While I was in high school at the time, I was what you would categorize as a complete and total nerd. At the time, I was still under prescribed glasses and I had little to no fashion sense, and this just seemed normal to me at the time. But looking back now, I understand why I never seemed to be able to make good friends, and honestly, I can't even blame myself. Anyways, back then I had next to no friends, and more often than not, I was usually always alone by myself. But on one fateful day, about a few days to Valentine's Day, where every other student in my school at the time was already obsessing and hyping for the day to celebrate and share love for and to their partners, there I was, unable to even be able to join in the fray. And first of all, this didn't bother me, not even the slightest bit. But then again, I was a young teenager at the time, and it really didn't seem like this was something any normal teenager should be okay with. But it wasn't like I had any other options, or any other person I could actually have asked out for that day. And so when the school announced that it was going to organize a little party for its students, which was going to take place on school grounds, attendance by every single student was mandatory. This only made me feel all the more left out. But then again, there was quite literally nothing I could have done, so I had to attend. Valentine's Day was soon upon us, and just as you would have expected, things were not looking so good for me. As at the time I'd gotten to the venue, practically every single student was with a partner, and those that were without had already gone and paired themselves up with someone else outside of the school students, as that too was also allowed. There I was, sitting alone in the corner of all the students in every single grade. I was the only one without a partner, or so I thought. Then, right as it was almost time for the final dance, there were a number of students who usually made me the object of their bullying. Those students just so happened to pass by me at the exact time when the dance was supposed to start, and they began their taunts, and right as they were about to get real serious about it, seeing as I wasn't responding to anything they were saying, there she was. Almost like a heroine, she came to my rescue, driving them away and assuming the position of my partner. I don't know what it was, but then right at that moment, I didn't know what to say nor do. And she just took my hands and told me to join her on the dance floor. Long story short, this was quite literally the most unforgettable moment of my life, as I was forever captivated by her actions from that day onwards. And also, that was the last day I ever got to experience any sort of action resulting in bullying from any of those guys, as it seemed like she had something to do with that. Ever since that day, Liz and I had always been together. At first, I was of the mindset that she was just doing all this just because she felt bad for me and all, but I was later convinced that this wasn't the case, as she took it upon herself to be open with her feelings for me, which had apparently developed over time. She did this right as we were about to leave high school, and ever since then I felt nothing but love for her. This was quite literally the start of our relationship, the genesis if you will. And it's from this point forward that my life really took a turn for the better, quite literally. Right after high school, we had officially begun dating, and life was honestly good between the both of us, no complaints whatsoever, and to be very honest, deep down, I wasn't okay with this. Don't get me wrong, I very much enjoy the peace we both bring into each other's lives and all, and I'm down for that every single day for the rest of our lives and all, but then again, I always had this uneasy feeling that something was amiss, and that I was quite literally ignoring something very important, but I could just never figure it out, and most times, the thought just went by like that yet again. Fast forward a bit to when we were both done with college, as at this time, this was where things had begun to get really interesting, as at the time, we were both just fresh out of college. And I was the only one lucky enough to have secured a high-paying job right off the bat, as this was due to some of the strings my parents pulled and all. Liz, on the other hand, was not so lucky. But then again, we were both living together at the time, and this was most definitely no problem for her, as I was most certainly willing to be a provider for her, so that she would most definitely not lack anything she needed. This was until she was able to secure some means of earning income, that is. Things were really okay with us, and I wasn't complaining, not even in the slightest bit. However, as time went on, I began to notice that not only had she become quite complacent with the way things were in her life at the time, but she had also misplaced a large majority of her priorities, and this was not something I was willing to stand by and watch happen, as I only wanted what was best for her. On several counts, I would call her out on her behavior and indifference towards quite literally having and planning a future for herself. And every single time we talked about this, she was always looking for a means and ways to avoid the conversation by saying that I didn't want what was best for her, and that I was always finding fault in any and everything she tried to do. It got so bad to an extent that I just didn't know what else to say to her anymore. I just chose to leave her to her vices, because I believed she was an adult and that she could very much make adult decisions for herself without my intervention, and that's how things took a nosedive between us. She'd begun avoiding me on several occasions in our house. She would rarely give me the time of her day, even though we were sharing the same living and sleeping space at the time, and I wasn't just fully prepared to tackle that issue, as I was having my brother come over to stay with me for some time. He'd been having issues in college at the time, and he just needed a place where he could calm down and collect his thoughts before going back to school, and I offered to accommodate him for the time being. While my brother was around, she would rarely come out of the room, as this was just her own way of apparently throwing a tantrum. However, one very day, I was supposed to have been away from home for 2 days, as it was a work-related business trip, and I left the care of our home in her hands. And she was totally uninterested from what I'd gathered, as she didn't even acknowledge my presence, let alone the info I'd just given her. At this time, I'd made up my mind that I was going to sit her down and talk things through when I got back, as I was not going to stand for all of her actions and behaviors again. I left the house that day, knowing fully well that I wasn't going to be back till I was. And then, unfortunately, my flight got delayed for a long time, and eventually the event got shifted to a later date. I had already spent quite some time at the airport, and I just decided to head back home straight. And when I got home, the scene I saw right before my eyes was quite damaging. She was having a forceful affair with my brother in my living room, and I just walked in on them. Lots of thoughts had flooded my mind at the time, but I just chose the less impulsive and less violent one, so I walked out. I couldn't bear to look at either one of them for the time being, and after that day, my brother left my house. But then she was still in there, waiting for me to come back, waiting for a reaction or a response, and I made sure she didn't get one. I came back to the house wearing not a single emotion on my face. She was terrified. She didn't know what I wanted to do and when I wanted to do it, but she knew I wanted to do something, and this made living with me, for her, quite literally a living heck. My actions and behavior went on for quite literally months on end, until she felt like she was going crazy, and then she finally ran away from home. She went on over to her parents' place and has never returned to my place ever since then. I think I've placed her in a state of permanent fear, as she would never be okay whenever she sees me, by doing nothing, I was able to cause the permanent and long-lasting effect of fear in her, and this brought me nothing but satisfaction, even though I had just experienced something terrible. I think she got what she deserves. So let me get this straight. Once OP found out that their partner was sleeping with their brother, their revenge was to come back, not even have any ounce of emotion, try to almost never acknowledge them, just kind of live their life autonomously around them, and they managed to do that for weeks on end? I mean, I can't lie, after a day or two you'd be like, are they ever going to go back to being a normal human being? It's almost as if you managed to find the off switch for the robot, but you don't know how to turn it back on, and it just keeps on going. You just get fearful it's going to just snap and break at some point. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.